Meditation stopped being a place I went to feel better. It became a place where everything I had been holding back finally showed itself. I would sit down expecting calm and instead meet pressure. Thoughts and sensations arriving as if they were late and angry. The body wanted to stand up. The mind wanted to narrate. The urge was simple: escape the stillness. That is what made it a battlefield. The moment I stayed, the fight moved from outside world into the core of me. In the old stories, Maui does not win by having good intentions. He is given impossible trials. He has to still fire. He has to wrestle the limits of nature. The point is not spectacle, it is capacity. My own impossible trials were not cinematic events. They were boring and brutal. Stay seated while the nervous system screams in agony. Keep the breath steady while the mind offers 1,000 justifications to spiral out of control. Return to the body when the imagination tries to lift off. Psychology might call it exposure. The system learns that discomfort is not death. It learns that urges can crest and fall without being obeyed, but only if the container holds. These were initiatory trials in the simplest sense. Ordeals asking whether I could remain present through fear, pressure, and the body's demand for escape without turning the whole thing into a big drama. So I learned to make the container real. Sleep protected like a law, training as a stabilizer, food and water before philosophy, and a grounded person I could tell the truth to. I started recording what actually happened to me. The pressure, the heat, the thoughts, the way the body changed. When I decided to stay instead of fleeing, not to create a story, but to stay honest about the pattern. The battle was not to win meditation. It was to stop fleeing myself. And every time I stayed, even one more breath, a tiny thread tightened. A way back. I could feel my palms damp, my knees aching, the room too loud, and I still chose to stay. After that, something else started happening. Old emotion began moving as if it had been waiting for permission. Not a neat catharsis, more like waves. I would feel fine, and suddenly my throat would tighten, my eyes would sting, my jaw would clench, and beads of sweat would roll down my forehead. Not for any clear reason. Sometimes it was anger with no story attached. Sometimes grief without an image. The body was purging what the mind had used discipline to keep organized. In the Yoruba tradition, the Orisha path is not walked by vibe. It is walked through trials that test character. Devotion under pressure. Can you stay clean in your actions when the weather turns? That became my question. Emotional purging can trick you. It can convince you that whatever you feel must be acted out, spoken out, posted, proclaimed, obeyed. But the older education says the opposite. Feel it, hold it, do not spill it onto the village. Some of what was moving had roots deeper than the movement itself. Love and illness, grief for lost selves and lost futures, the tenderness and strain of caring in situations where the body learns mortality before the mind has language for it. The strange way another person's suffering can begin reshaping your emotional architecture. Even family healing changed the emotional field. Watching someone close to you alter what seems possible can shift the inner ground in ways that do not arrive neatly or cleanly. Psychology might call this effect tolerance, the capacity to experience intensity without becoming dangerous. I started building practices that treated emotion like weather, not prophecy. Cold water on the face, slow exhale, a walk without headphones, a session in the sauna, lifting something heavy until the mind quieted. Then the simple governance, keep commitments, pay what needs paying, answer messages, show up where I said I would. Community and accountability were not distractions from the process. They were the only proof it was real. If I was purging but wrecking relationships, I was not initiating, I was leaking. The trial was not emotional expression, it was emotional responsibility. Somewhere in that, the earliest shape of the wounded healer began to appear. Not as another identity, but as a hard-earned possibility. Maybe being broken open honestly could one day make me less harmful and more useful. Slowly, the same thing happened. The thread tightened. Not overnight, but enough that I could wake the next day and keep living. Then came the loop. The temptations did not arrive once. They returned in cycles, as if the labyrinth was checking whether the lesson had struck. I would have a few steady days, and then the mind would whisper old offers. Skip the basics, chase intensity, chase substances, prove you are beyond ordinary limits. It could be as simple as staying up too late because I felt clear. It could be the urge to drop responsibilities because I needed space. The danger was not the thought itself. The danger was believing it was truth just because it felt charged. In Buddhist myth, Mara tempts the Buddha right at the threshold of awakening itself. Not with obvious evil, but with subtle distortions, pride and fear and fantasy. The promise of an easier route. It is a mirror for the inner saboteur that appears precisely when discipline begins working. Psychology might call it self-handicapping or the return of old coping strategies. Either way, the test was whether I could be held. Could I accept structure without calling it oppression? Could someone I respected say stop? And I would actually stop. That is where community changed shape for me. I no longer wanted admiration. I wanted one trusted witness. One person who could see the pattern returning and name it before it gathered force and momentum. Because the hardest part of this phase was not temptation itself. It was the loneliness of carrying an inner struggle back into a world that often looked unchanged, as if nothing in me had even shifted at all. That kind of loneliness can make intensity look intimate. It can make old distortions feel like companions. So I built a reality check protocol that did not care about my mood. The loop kept coming, but each time I answered it the same way, not with willpower, but with systems. Mara was not defeated by a vision. He was defeated by humility and routine, again and again, until the temptation lost its glamour and its pull. And I did it before things got loud. The next labor was the strangest because it did not look like progress. It looked like repeating the same collapse in smaller forms. A stretch of stability, then a dip, a return to grounding, then another wobble. Collapse and recovery cycles appeared, and the mind hated it. It wanted a straight line. It wanted linear healing. It wanted a certificate. But the labyrinth does not grade you. It trains you. The Aztec warrior trials were not a single heroic act. They were repeated tests of endurance, of discipline, and of the willingness to face fear without turning reckless. That became a mirror for my own pattern. Can you keep showing up when the thrill is gone and the work is still here? Can you keep showing up when it's the same old boring advice over and over again? Some days the collapse was simply fatigue. I would notice my shoulders creeping up, my breath getting shallow, my thoughts speeding. The body would tell the truth before the mind ever admitted it. So I learned to respond early, eat before I spiral, train before I overthink, go outside before I isolate, make a small list and complete it. The psychological reading is simple. The nervous system learns through repetition. Regulation becomes a skill, not a concept, but only if you stop romanticizing the dip. The dip is not the universe speaking. It might just be sleep debt. It might just be blood sugar. And it might just be loneliness. Meaning never cancels consequence. If I ignored those realities, the cycle intensified. If I respected them, the cycle shortened. In the middle of this, I began to understand a harsher truth. Recovery is not a mood, it is a practice. You do not feel your way out. You regulate your way out. You keep the law. You keep the body. You do all the boring things over and over. You repeat them again and again. That is how the warrior survives. Not by winning once, but by refusing to abandon the thread. Even when it feels mundane, even when it's the last thing you want to carry on doing. There was also a darker education inside those cycles. Each wobble reminded me how close I could come to the edge without theatrics. How fragile sanity and coherence can feel when the body and mind start slipping out of rhythm. That awareness brought its own burden. Gratitude, yes, but also a kind of survivor's guilt, and the loneliness of knowing how near the drop can be while still having to function in ordinary life. The real training was learning to carry both worlds, the knowledge of the edge and the demands of the day, without giving either one total power over me, to be in the world but not of the world. Eventually, the message became impossible to miss. The labyrinth escalates with each trial, not as punishment, as curriculum. Each time I passed through a test, the next one asked for more precision, more honesty, less story, more structure. That is when a strange myth slipped into mind. Zhuangzi's butterfly dream. The question of whether you are a man dreaming of being a butterfly, or whether a butterfly dreaming of being a man. It is not about escaping reality. It is about recognizing how easily the mind confuses experience with certainty. In that phase, my perceptions could feel profound 1 hour and mad and absurd the next. The mind could generate meaning faster than it could verify it. Psychology might call it cognitive looseness under stress, or the way attention binds patterns when it is hungry for control. The antidote was far from more interpretation. It was a verification, the same boring routine. Sleep and hydration and training and routine and work done and bills handled and meals eaten and conversations with grounded people who did not care about my metaphysics. I began treating insight like a visitor, not as a sovereign king. If it helped me live with more responsibility, I kept it. If it made me inflated, paranoid, reckless, or disconnected, I named it as danger. I learned to ask one brutal question. Does this meaning improve my behavior? Or does it excuse it? Because the sacred spiral has a rule. Fire still burns, law still exists, community still gets impacted. The labors were not a test of spirituality. They were a test of maturity. Could I stay inside ordinary life while the inner world intensified? Could I keep my feet on the ground while my mind wanted to fly? Gradually, another implication emerged. Surviving the labyrinth was not the final point. Being transformed by it without becoming inflated by it was. Love had to become action. Depth had to survive routine. The role I was being prepared for if there was one at all, could only be useful if it remained human, if it remained disciplined, and if it remained ordinary enough to live in the world. That is the householder test. That is the wounded healer test. The injury cannot become vanity. It has to become conduct. That is the real escape from the labyrinth. Not leaving it, but becoming the kind of man who can walk it without poisoning everything around him.